on this Cruze here, it looks like, if I'm understanding this PCV system correctly, this valve inside this intake, what they're calling the PCV valve, is completely gone. I don't know if I can show this to you or not. I'm going to try. I don't know if you guys can see that, but the valve is completely gone out of there. You can see that big hole in the middle. This is a new intake that we're replacing on here. And what we're trying to do, I'm trying to understand how this PCV system actually works on this vehicle. So if we look down inside this intake, we can see our new valve. Now this PCV valve is located right about here, because we can actually push a light in here. This is the way they recommend that you check the valve, is by looking down inside this hole. And I get you on the hole. There we go, on the hole. And when you look down in there, oh, we can't see this in the sunlight. Let me get you in the shade here. I don't know if I adjusted anything by moving this, trying to do this with a camera in my hand. Crap. All right, now if we look down in there, we can see the brand new valve and its location. They state to check this every oil change is to, when you look down in this hole, you can see the very tip of the valve, that orange spot right there. You can see the very tip of the valve, and they recommend that you clean it with a Q-tip and some alcohol or something to every time you do an oil change on it. So that means that this valve is right about here. So my guess, the only thing that makes sense to me is that when this intake has negative pressure in it, this is a turbo, 1.4 turbo Chevy, I should have said that in the beginning, is that when the turbo is not working or not under boost, we have negative pressure inside this intake. The negative pressure will then open this little valve up, and we have standard PCV operation. Excuse me. With the standard PCV operation, and the compressor's not forcing the hose that goes on this thing, is it's got a PC valve in it as well. This hose attaches on the top, runs down here to the intake side of the compressor, right next to where the compressor would be. So as air is being forced in here, it might create a Venturi effect right here, creating a low pressure as well, venting the exhaust gases. Now, when this vehicle does go under boost, all of a sudden we have pressure pushing in here because we're forcing pressure into the intake, and that immediately pushes this valve shut, and then that hose takes over, and the compressed gases, to create a negative pressure here under boost, is then sucked through this one-way valve. One way, this pressure only goes this way, it does not return. The Venturi effect creates a low pressure in the intake, causing us to exhaust our PCV pressures. Now, this hole that's on the back of the intake right here goes directly to the valve cover. Okay, there, it doesn't go anywhere else. It ports straight out to here. So this hole just comes right out on this, on the top of the head, leading into the port on this valve cover. Okay, so our negative pressures are controlled by a regulator valve, which most people like to call a PCV valve, but this is a pressure regulator valve right here. Now, this is controlled by the negative pressures that are being brought in here. When the negative pressures are brought in here, then this valve starts to open up, circling around to here and going to these two ports right here, and to take the gas crankcase gases out and recirculate them through the ported hole on the intake right here, coming out right here, and then feeding it through this port here, purging the gases into the intake and basically recirculating the gases on the compressor side. On the Venturi effect that's being caused by the compressor is forcing under boost, is letting this thing create negative pressure to vent the exhaust gases into the compressor and recirculating them through the compressor back into the intake and so forth. So when we have positive pressure here, that causes this valve to shut, and then the Venturi hose that goes to the turbo compressor side of the turbo creates a vacuum, a low pressure side here, sucking the gases into the compressor, sucking the gases into the compressor right here, and then the compressors in turn returning them into the forced pressure side, going through the cooler all the way back around out of this tube and recirculating it back into the intake. Now I'm hoping that my understanding of this is the proper way to understand how this PCV system works. Because without that valve in there, this thing, my part one on this thing was putting a scope on it, and we had positive crankcase pressures as we were driving down the road. Now, whether the boost is kicking in that early or not is I'm not aware of. I do not know what this compressor is set at to start releasing gas or start boosting the engine, forcing positive pressure into this side of the intake. But again, a simple explanation that I can come up with is that negative pressure here, the valve is open, okay, and then it's sucking the gases through here, through the side of the head, straight out of the head, straight into the intake, or to the straight negative pressure, regulator valve opens up and lets the gases that come out of the head right here on the crankcase, these two ports right here, are down to the engine, letting the gases being, negative pressure, sucking the gases out and keeping our crankcase pressure at a low PSI instead of anything above atmospheric pressure. So, but when the boost is created, the boost forces pressure in here, forcing this valve to close. Then this other PCV valve designed in that hose over there takes over, and the compressor on the turbo creates the Venturi effect and causes the gases to be sucked out under boost, and then recirculated through the turbo, the charge hose from the turbo all the way back into the intake, and basically recirculates it like an EGR valve would. So I'm gonna go with that as my best guess. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. So I'm gonna put this intake on here, then I'm gonna scope it, and then we're gonna see if this helped it, see if this fixed the problem or not. So we put a transducer on here for our picoscope measurements. We're gonna see what happens now. Got the new intake installed. Everything looks good, cranked it up. It's right at operating temperatures. When I loosen the cap while the engine runs, the engine tries to stall, so we got good vacuum at an idle. So now we're going to take it for a test drive, and we're going to see what happens with our PCV pressures under load. So give me just a second here. I'll close this hood. All right. Now, I don't have my assistant this time to help me. She's busy working, so I'm going to try to keep this on here so you guys can see. I don't know if I can zoom in or not with this camera phone thing. Here we go. All right. So here we go. We're going to crank the engine. Okay, there we go with our vacuum. Let's get us a line down here on 0 pressure. I don't know how you guys do this fingering a laptop. Well, that's about as good as it's gonna get from me. So I don't know if we're recording. 24 waveform. Okay, I don't know how to. This is a Pico 7. Because I click here to shut it off. Okay, stopped. And we're gonna start it. Yeah, there goes our new waveforms. I'll give her a couple of accelerations to see what happens. Just like before. Now I'm going to accelerate hard. Snap the throttle. So you get a little bit of pressure. But the big game is going to be seeing how this thing works when we drive it. So all this has just been installed, so there's no test drives been done or anything on it yet. Seatbelt on. Okay, put it in reverse. Zoom in on this some. Okay, we're at 10 frames. Let me back it up. This also has a bushing missing off of the transmission shifter cable, which is probably next on the customer's list. Okay. Now I may stop this again because we're probably going to run out of frames. I don't know how far this thing goes on frames on Windows, on Pico 7, so. Okay, feels like we're in drive. All right. So now we're going to drive normal. Start accelerating. She's hitting right at atmospheric crush pace. She's going a little bit above. Might have to replace that PCV hose going to the turbo. Sign. Accelerating. No. We had some seriously high pressures last time, so now I'm gonna. Okay, that's almost floor. We're barely above atmospheric pressure. So, well, not like we was last time. This thing was capping at about 5 psi in the crankcase as we were driving it. So I'm gonna keep going here. This thing stopped recording frames. So I'm gonna save this real quick. I'm gonna try to figure out how to save it. How do we save it on here? Save. Oh crap. All right. Let me pause this for a second. I need both. Okay, I'm starting to realize I don't like Windows Pico 7 that much. So here we go. Oh crap, it didn't even start. All right, let me get it running again. I'm in Houston, Texas, so I gotta be cautious around here. These people drive like idiots. I'm pretty sure they do everywhere else, but not as bad as in Texas, I guarantee you. Okay, here we go. Now we're slightly above atmospheric pressure, and I can't get that line dead zero anyway. So we're gonna drive it on the 4th frame. What I'm glad to see is with the new PCV valve installed. I know the biggest problem is everybody complains about oil consumption with the PCV valve, which this vehicle didn't seem to show that type of problem, but it's blowing seals. So now we're gonna drive this on a street where I can give her some oomph. So I'm trying to watch the damn thing in drive. It's barely coming above atmospheric pressure again. So stop. Well, shoot. It's not going to let me, I don't think. I'm going to stop this for a minute. Alright. This this one particular street that I like to get on for test driving, so we're going to do that. It's right up here. All right, let's start again. Okay, I'm not going to save that file. We're accelerating. Coming slightly above atmospheric pressure. Let's turn and we'll floor it. All right, well, I think we fixed our problem. Now the next step is to clean the underside of the engine again and test drive it and see if the rear main seal does need replacement. So I'm not 100% sure about that. But anyway, there goes the ice cream man. All right, he's let me go. So well, I think we've got our problem pretty much taken care of. If I fine line this, I might find that I'm right at zero pressure or below. I wish it would stay lower than that under turbo engagement, but I honestly just don't know. I'm not a GM tech. I don't just work on GMs. I work on pretty much everything. So right now it's just one of those let's see what happens scenario. Okay, we'll do it again. I'm looking at this as pretty much a fix. I'm also going to recommend that I am going to recommend that hose replacement, and I might scope it again just to see if we're below 0 psi when the turbo kicks in. But as for right now, compared to what it was on the other one, our other scale, let me stop this because I do want to save this one. On the other video, our pressures were shooting up to here on acceleration when turbo engagement was found, or I'm assuming it was turbo engagement, but we had pressures shooting way up here, and we had replaced seals, oil pan seal, time and chain seal along with time and chain water pump, and the front main seal had been replaced, valve cover gasket had been replaced, put a new turbo in it as well, so I can't verify my scenario on the wastegate being cracked, causing an increase in pressure as well, or slowing the turbine down, not creating a better compression pull off of the turbo. So I'm gonna leave it at this. So hopefully this helps you guys. You know, if not, it's the best way I could figure it out. So good luck.